The hum of the observer was a song I knew better than my own pulse, a low thrum against the infinite silence of the void. For 347 days, it had been my world, a metallic shell cradling me against the crushing indifference of deep space. My name is Grant Holloway, and this vessel, a marvel of human ingenuity, was my solitary temple of inquiry, pushing ever outward, beyond the charted constellations, into the true dark. Each morning, I awoke to the simulated dawn cycle, a gentle orange glow filling my small quarters, a faint echo of a sun I hadn't seen with unaided eyes in almost a year. My ritual was unwavering. A nutrient paste for breakfast, a check of the ship's vital systems, then a descent into the data streams. It was a dedication bordering on obsession, this tireless vigil at the edge of comprehension. My purpose was to listen, to observe, to chart the subtle shifts in the cosmic tapestry, hoping to find a loose thread. Today, however, the threads seemed to tangle. My fingers, accustomed to the smooth, cool touch of the interface, paused over a series of gravitational wave readings. They were faint at first, almost imperceptible, buried beneath the usual background noise of stellar nurseries and collapsing giants. My initial thought was a sensor malfunction, a ghost in the machine born of cosmic dust or a stray solar flare. I ran diagnostics, cross-referenced the readings with every available long-range array. The systems were pristine. The anomaly persisted. This wasn't a glitch. This was something real. I zoomed in, isolating the coordinates. Far beyond the furthest nebulae, past the last known markers of the Orion Arm, lay an emptiness so profound it almost felt like a wall. And within that emptiness, a disturbance. The gravitational distortions weren't behaving like any known phenomenon. They weren't radiating from a black hole, nor were they the signature of a merging neutron star. Instead, they described an impossible geometry, a warp in the very fabric of space-time that seemed to fold in on itself, defying Euclidean principles. It was a tear, a wound in the seamless cloth of reality, and it was growing. My breath hitched. This was it. The reason I had journeyed so far, endured the gnawing solitude, the silent vastness that pressed in on my sanity. This was the discovery that would redefine our understanding of the universe. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated scientific joy, a thrill that eclipsed the months of quiet sacrifice. I spent the next several cycles immersed, calibrating, verifying, pushing the observer's deep scan capabilities to their absolute limit. The data coalesced into an undeniable truth. A region of space, vast beyond imagining, was experiencing a profound, inexplicable gravitational shift. It wasn't merely a strong gravitational field. It was a wrong one. Space itself felt stretched thin, then pulled taut, then folded into impossible angles that my instruments struggled to model. The mathematical projections were incoherent, breaking down into paradoxes. I named it then, with a quiet reverence that echoed in the silent bridge. The chasm anomaly. As I finalized the preliminary report, a strange sensation pricked at the edges of my awareness. A scent, faint but distinct, like damp earth and wood smoke. It was an impossible thing, here in the sterile confines of the observer, amidst the recycled air and metallic tang. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, convinced fatigue was playing tricks. But then, a fleeting image, vivid as a memory, bloomed in the periphery of my vision. Cobblestones slick with moisture, low-slung cottages with smoke curling from their chimneys, and an ancient bell tower shrouded in a thick pearlescent haze. A foggy village. The image was gone as quickly as it came, leaving behind only the lingering phantom scent and a disorienting sense of displacement. My hand trembled as I keyed in the last data point. The vast emptiness outside no longer felt quite so empty. I knew with a certainty that resonated deep within my bones that I had to go closer. This was where the known dissolved into the impossible. The anomaly, a swirling bruise on the fabric of space, now filled my primary viewport, a silent, hungry maw. Its presence was not merely visual. It pressed against the hull of the observer, a subtle, pervasive hum that resonated not through the metal, but through the very marrow of my bones. My determination, a stubborn ember against the void's chill, flared. This was the moment. Approaching designated perimeter, I murmured, my voice a thin, reedy thing against the ship's deep breath. My fingers danced over the console, initiating the long-range scans, a cascade of light and data projected across the shimmering screens. The ship's internal chronometer ticked with an unnerving slowness, each second stretching into an eternity as the probes launched, tiny metallic motes swallowed by the anomaly's periphery. The initial data streamed back, a torrent of impossible figures. The energy signatures were unlike anything cataloged in humanity's vast archives. They pulsed with a rhythm that defied known physics, a chaotic harmony that felt less like a force and more like a fundamental property of being. I leaned closer, my brow furrowed, tracing the lines of the spectral analysis. Non-baryonic matter, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Impossible densities. Negative mass fluctuations. It was not just an anomaly. It was a contradiction, a cosmic blasphemy that mocked every equation I had ever learned. Then, a new line appeared on the audio spectrum, faint, barely discernible above the ship's own operational hum. It wasn't a burst, not a coded message, but a sustained, repeating pattern. A resonant frequency, like a bell rung across an unfathomable distance, its echoes returning to me in a slow, deliberate cadence. It wasn't trying to communicate. It simply was, vibrating with an ancient, inherent rhythm. I isolated the signal, enhancing it, and a strange, almost musical thrum filled the cockpit, a sound that felt both ancient and utterly alien. It was a melody without beginning or end, a loop that suggested eternity. I turned my head sharply, my gaze sweeping the empty space behind me, but found nothing. Only the familiar metallic gleam of the observer's interior. But then, it happened again. A distant chime, like glass breaking far, far away, echoed in the periphery of my hearing. A sound so delicate I almost questioned if I had truly heard it. My eyes, scanning the console, caught a flicker in my peripheral vision, a fleeting distortion in the reflection of the bulkhead, a ripple that wasn't there a moment before. It was like watching water warp the image of a stone, but on a solid surface. I blinked, the image gone, replaced by the mundane reality of polished steel. My heart gave a strange, uneven lurch, a persistent feeling, like an unseen gaze, pressed against the back of my neck. It was a weight, an invisible presence that seemed to scrutinize my every move, every breath. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often, a primal instinct overriding my scientific detachment. The air in the cockpit grew heavy, thick with the impossible data and the ceaseless resonant thrum. They seemed to coalesce, to gain substance, and with them, a sudden vivid image bloomed in my mind, overlaying the sterile reality of my controls. For a terrifying, disorienting moment, the gleaming console dissolved, replaced by the wet, earthy scent of damp stone and the ghostly outlines of timbered houses. It was a profound, terrifying intrusion, a sensory hallucination so complete it ripped a gasp from my throat. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it vanished. I was back in the cockpit, my hands gripping the armrests, knuckles white. The resonant signal pulsed, steady and indifferent. This was not merely an anomaly. It was a doorway. And I had just stepped through. The hum that pressed against the observer was not a vibration I could trace to any engine or structural stressor. It lived in the bones of the vessel, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to bypass my eardrums entirely, settling instead in the hollows of my skull. My fingers, accustomed to the cool, predictable textures of the ship's console, felt a phantom shudder beneath the polished surfaces. This was not a malfunction, I told myself. Not yet. This was an anomaly, a phenomenon demanding rigorous, unemotional investigation. I initiated a full diagnostic sweep. Every sensor array, every gravimetric transducer, every energy conduit singing through its self-check. The readouts returned clean, impossibly so. No structural fatigue, no power fluctuations, no atmospheric contaminants. Yet, the hum persisted, and the primary viewport, which moments ago had framed a swirling bruise of distorted space, now seemed to ripple, the stars beyond stretching and contracting as if viewed through a liquid lens. Isolation, I muttered, my voice a dry rasp in the cabin's hush. Sensory deprivation is playing tricks. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. Weeks alone. The endless velvet black of deep space, the gnawing silence. It was a potent brew for psychological distortion. My training had prepared me for this, for the mental fortitude required to differentiate external reality from internal fabrication. I would recalibrate, reevaluate. The scientific method was my anchor, my shield against the encroaching strangeness. But then the patterns began. Initially, they were subtle, flickering at the edge of my perception. A sensor glitch, I decided. A transient data corruption. I ran a firmware integrity check. Nothing. The next manifestation was less fleeting. While reviewing gravitational wave data, a lattice of lines meant to represent energy fluctuations began to coalesce. A cube that appeared to contain its own exterior. A pyramid whose apex pointed simultaneously inward and out. This was not random noise. This was structure. A structure that hurt my eyes to follow, causing a dull ache behind them, a sense of mental vertigo. I dismissed it as an error in the rendering algorithm, a software bug triggered by the extreme anomaly readings. I spent hours rewriting segments of code, meticulously debugging, but the patterns returned, bolder each time. They bloomed not just on the screens, but in the ambient light too. The familiar gleam of polished metal on the console surface would momentarily warp, reflecting a distorted, impossible image of my own face. Elongated, fractured, as if seen through a shattered prism of alien design. The ship itself seemed to respond. A bulkhead, a solid, immutable sheet of alloy I had walked past 1,000 times, now had a faint, almost imperceptible curve where there should have been none. I ran my hand along it, expecting to feel a physical deviation, but my fingers traced only smooth, cold metal. The distortion was purely visual, a trick of light, or perhaps a trick of my mind. Sleep offered no respite. My dreams, once a realm of quiet processing or familiar memories, became a canvas for the impossible. Structures of obsidian and bone, impossibly slender, defied gravity, spiraling into geometries that made my mind ache with their wrongness. The air was thick with mist, muffling sound, blurring edges. Walls leaned inward at unnatural pitches. Roofs met at points that suggested impossible interior spaces. I tried to find a street that led out, but every turn brought me back to the same impossible intersection, the same looming, skewed structures. The ship's cabin, usually a comforting sanctuary, now felt small, its rigid lines an illusion. The anomaly was not merely out there, it was seeping in, dissolving the very framework of my reality, piece by agonizing piece. I would not let this mission, nor my own mind, succumb to the whispers of the void. I would recalibrate, reevaluate, and proceed with the meticulous precision demanded by the unknown. But the Odyssey, my sanctuary of steel and logic, began to betray me. A low hum, a resonant thrum I had long dismissed as a minor system oscillation, deepened, vibrating through the deck plates into the soles of my boots. It was a frequency that bypassed the ear, settling instead in the hollows of my bones, a cold, insistent tremor. Each shift of light was a tiny visual arrhythmia, jarring my perception. I reached for the comms, my fingers brushing the cool, unresponsive panel. A sudden, sharp crackle burst through the cabin speakers, a sound like static electricity igniting a dried leaf. It wasn't the usual hiss of deep space interference. This was sharper, more immediate, as if the very air inside the Odyssey had torn. The view screen, usually a window to the indifferent tapestry of stars, shimmered. Not a technical glitch, not a lensing effect, but a distortion of the light itself, as if the very vacuum outside had developed a cataract. The pinprick stars elongated, stretched into impossibly thin, luminous threads, then contracted, winking out of existence only to reappear in different configurations. This was no malfunction. This was an intrusion. The air in the cabin, usually recycled and dry, grew heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and distant wood smoke. It was a smell utterly alien to the Odyssey, a phantom echo of a forgotten world. My vision blurred at the edges, the familiar contours of the navigation console softening, melting into an indistinct gray. Then, with the suddenness of a dropped curtain, the Odyssey was gone. The sterile panels, the blinking lights, the hum of the life support, all dissolved into a swirling, impenetrable mist. I stood, not on the resilient deck of my vessel, but on a cobbled path, uneven and slick with moisture. Around me, shapes materialized from the pervasive shroud, low-slung buildings with slate roofs, their windows like vacant eyes peering from the gloom. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin, though I felt no wind. The fog was a living thing, coiling around my ankles, obscuring anything beyond a few yards. It muted the colors of the buildings, rendering them in shades of bruised purple and faded charcoal. There was no sign of life, no movement, no sound of distant chatter or the clang of a smithy. My mind reeled, grasping for a logical tether. This was a hallucination, a vivid, all-consuming vision. My training demanded I analyze, not succumb. But the sensory input was overwhelming, too rich, too real to be merely a construct of my beleaguered psyche. I walked, my steps echoing unnaturally loud in the profound quiet. The village seemed endless, each turn revealing another identical lane, another cluster of silent, watchful structures. Then I saw it. At the end of one such lane, where the fog should have continued its seamless embrace, there was an absence. It was a tear in the fabric of the visible, a jagged, impossible rent where the world simply ceased to be. The buildings on either side ended abruptly, their stone walls shearing off into nothingness, their foundations hanging in an impossible suspension. The tear was not black, nor was it light. It was an absence of definition, a place where all concepts of dimension and spatial continuity broke down. It writhed, not with motion, but with a silent, internal agitation, like a wound that refused to heal. And through it, or perhaps within it, I glimpsed something. It was not a shape, not an entity with form or mass. It was a presence, an immense, indifferent awareness that permeated the tear, extending beyond its boundaries into the very air of the foggy village. It was the crushing weight of profound scale, a realization that the tear was not merely a hole into something, but a revelation of something fundamental. It was a fold in existence, and what lay beyond was not a hidden dimension, but the very infrastructure of reality itself laid bare. And it was vast, infinitely, terrifyingly vast. My perception fractured. The cobblestones beneath my feet liquefied into starlight. The silent, watchful buildings began to twist, their geometry warping, their slate roofs peeling back like flayed skin to reveal the impossible, shimmering distortions of the deep space anomaly. The tear in the village was the tear in my vision, the tear in my understanding. I felt myself falling, not through space, but through layers of perception, each one peeling away to reveal a more unsettling truth. Unknowable being. I gasped, my eyes snapping open, or perhaps snapping back. The Odyssey cabin was around me, solid and real. The console lights pulsed with their usual rhythm. The view screen showed the familiar velvet black, studded with distant stars, and the hum of the vessel. It no longer sounded like a machine. It was a low, resonant drone, a sound that carried the echo of something vast and utterly indifferent, something that had merely unfolded a fragment of itself for me to witness. The hum of the observer had always been a lullaby, a steady thrumming that spoke of systems online, of meticulously calibrated machinery holding back the void. They were etched into the ship itself. I first noticed it in the primary access corridor leading to the bridge. A subtle elongation, a stretch that defied the architectural schematics I knew by heart. My stride, usually covering the distance in precisely 17 steps, now required 19, then 20. My hand, reaching for the familiar cool of the bulkhead, found it further than anticipated. The sensation akin to walking through water, where perception warps depth. I paused, pressing my palm against the cool metal, feeling for any structural vibration, any telltale shudder of a system malfunction. Nothing. Only the steady, unnerving thrum. Later, in the navigation bay, the angles seemed to subtly shift. The console, a bastion of precise right angles and rectilinear displays, appeared to possess a slight, almost imperceptible skew. What I had always perceived as perfectly horizontal lines now carried a faint upward tilt on the left, a downward pull on the right. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced fatigue was playing its cruel tricks. I pulled up the internal schematics, comparing them to my visual field. The digital representation was pristine, unblemished. Yet, my eyes insisted on the warped reality before me. It was like staring at a painting where the perspective was just off, enough to prickle the mind. The display panels, once clear and concise, began to flicker with unfamiliar patterns. Not glitches, not static, but symbols that defied any known script, any language I had ever encountered. They were intricate, curvilinear, resembling nothing so much as dried veins seen under a microscope, or the frantic flight path of insects drawn by an invisible hand. One panel, usually displaying environmental controls, cycled through these alien glyphs, each one a riddle, a silent scream in an unknown tongue. For a horrifying moment, a section of the main view screen, usually a window onto the star-dusted velvet, shimmered, resolving not into the cosmic tapestry, into a fleeting, impossible vista. A cobblestone street slick with mist, ancient stone buildings hunched under a sky the color of bruised plums, all shrouded in a thick, pervasive gloom. This was beyond fatigue, beyond simple malfunction. The ship was not merely malfunctioning, it was changing. Not physically, not in a way that registered on diagnostic readouts, but in its very essence, its perceived reality. The entity, that vast indifference, was not merely out there. It was here, within the observer, twisting the fabric of my environment to mirror its own incomprehensible nature. Paranoia, a venomous tendril, began to coil around my thoughts, tightening with each aberrant detail. Was I truly alone? Or was some unseen force now a co-occupant, a silent sculptor of my reality? I needed to reestablish contact. Not for data, not for confirmation, but for the sheer, desperate anchor of another human voice. I strode to the long-range communication console, my movements now jerky, propelled by a frantic urgency. My fingers, trembling slightly, keyed in the secure frequencies, the earthbound coordinates, requesting immediate channel open. The static that answered was not the gentle hiss of deep space interference. It was a cacophony, a swirling vortex of sound that defied categorization. There were fragments of speech, Yes, but they were disjointed, nonsensical, like 1,000 conversations played at once, each syllable ripped from its context and reassembled into gibberish. I heard what sounded like a child's laugh, immediately followed by a guttural roar, then the chime of a bell, all layered over a high-pitched whine that grated against my eardrums. It was not a message, not even a broken signal. It was chaos given form, a sonic reflection of the ship's warping reality. "Repeat, Earth Command," I demanded, my voice rising, desperate. "Do you copy? Do you read?" The response was a crescendo of the same fractured noise, culminating in a sound that was not sound at all, but a pressure, a crushing weight in my skull, as if the very air in the cabin had suddenly solidified. I tore the headset from my ears, gasping, my head swimming. The console lights flickered, not in a malfunction, but in a syncopated rhythm that felt disturbingly deliberate. The alien glyphs pulsed on the environmental panel, a silent, mocking chorus. The ship, once my sanctuary, was now a labyrinth of shifting perceptions, a stage for a horror I was only beginning to comprehend. The connection to home, to reason, was severed, replaced by the entity's incomprehensible static. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The headset lay discarded, a tangled mess of wires and plastic on the cold floor. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with a residual vibration that resonated through bone and sinew, an echo of the non-sound that had just ripped through my skull. The console lights, once a steady constellation of green and amber, now pulsed erratically, their rhythm mirroring the frantic beat of something deep within my own chest. A cold sweat slicked my skin, though the cabin temperature remained constant. My breath hitched, a shallow, desperate attempt to draw air into lungs that felt suddenly too small, too fragile. I pressed my palms against my temples, willing the crushing pressure to subside. It felt as if my very thoughts were being kneaded, stretched thin, then snapped. Fragments of memory, vivid and startling, flashed across my inner eye, then dissolved before I could grasp them. "Grant," I whispered, testing the name on my tongue. It felt unfamiliar. A sound, yes, a label, but did it truly belong to me? Had it always? My gaze drifted to the main view screen, still displaying the swirling, impossible geometry of the anomaly. It seemed to pulse, to breathe, drawing my perception into its depths. Was it doing this? Was it reaching inside me, unspooling the thread of who I was? A motivation, once burning bright, had dwindled to a faint ember. Why was I here? For what grand purpose? The questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Then, a sudden, intrusive image bloomed in my mind, not a memory I recognized, yet undeniably vivid. I was standing on a cobblestone street, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and wood smoke. A bell tower, ancient and moss-covered, rose through a shroud of mist. A pervasive quiet settled over everything, broken only by the distant, mournful cry of a seabird. But it wasn't my home. My home was a sterile, modular apartment overlooking a city grid, not some archaic settlement lost to time and mist. Was this a memory? Whose? "This isn't real," I muttered, my voice thin and reedy in the confines of the cabin. But the village persisted, a static image behind my eyes, more solid than the flickering console. "Is any of it real, Grant? Or merely what you perceive to be so?" I flinched, spinning around, searching the empty cabin. No one. Of course, no one. I was alone. Utterly, profoundly alone. My name, my past, my mission. They were anchors once, holding me fast to a discernible reality. Now they felt like ropes fraying in a storm. I tried to conjure the face of my mentor, the colleague who had seen me off, the familiar warmth of my family's embrace. Their features were indistinct, blurred at the edges, like old photographs left too long in the sun. The emotions associated with them were even more ephemeral, ghosts of feelings I could no longer grasp. I was a fleeting pattern of neurons, a temporary arrangement of matter, spinning on a tiny rock, utterly oblivious to the vast, indifferent tapestry of the cosmos. The anomaly wasn't just a gravitational distortion. It was a window into an indifference so absolute it dwarfed every human construct, every cherished memory, every scrap of identity. The foggy village shimmered again, a phantom echo. Was it a place I'd forgotten? The lines between what I knew, what I remembered, and what was being imposed upon me had dissolved into a single terrifying blur. I was losing myself, not to madness, but to a slow, methodical erasure. It was not malevolence I faced, but something far more terrifying, a complete and utter lack of recognition of my very being. I was simply not. My past, a series of fading photographs. My mission, a crumbling edifice against a sky that was no longer blue or black, but something else entirely. The vessel, once a fortress of steel and science, now seemed porous, its bulkheads breathing, its circuits humming with an alien song. I pressed a palm against a console that shimmered, not with light, but with an internal tremor. The metal felt soft, yielding, like damp earth. The readouts, a cascade of gibberish, danced in patterns that suggested meaning only to revoke it an instant later. My eyes, though, saw beyond the flickering data. They saw the edges of things blurring, the corners of the cabin softening into an impossible curve. What was once a solid wall now seemed to recede, then swell, as if the very space within my confined quarters was stretching, contracting, exhaling. The air thickened, growing heavy with the scent of wet stone and ancient decay, a smell utterly foreign to the sterile environment of deep space. My vision swam. The metallic gleam of the vessel's interior dissolved, replaced by a gray, shifting veil. Then, it was there. Not around me, but as me. As the vessel. As everything. The transition was seamless, terrifying. The hum of the ship's engines vanished, replaced by the hushed drip of water from unseen eaves and the muted, shuffling sound of wind through skeletal trees. I stood on a cobbled path, uneven and treacherous, swallowed by a thick, milky fog that clung to every surface, muffling sound, distorting distance. The architecture was impossible, yet utterly present. Buildings leaned at angles that defied physics, their upper floors disappearing into the opaque ceiling of the mist. I walked, or rather, I was propelled, down a narrow lane between these leaning structures. Every step was a confrontation with the unknown. The fog swirled, thick as spun glass, parting just enough to reveal a glimpse of a twisted lamppost, its gas flame long extinguished, or the gnarled branch of an ancient oak, its leaves long fallen. There was no one here, no sound of life, no hint of human presence, save for the faint, lingering scent of wood smoke that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. Then, I felt it. Not saw, not heard, but felt. An immensity that dwarfed the concept of space itself. It was the principle of their being. It was the architect. It was not a creature, nor a thing with form or intent. It was a foundational truth, a living geometry that simply was. I perceived it as an infinite, ancient indifference, a vastness that transcended time and dimension. Its presence pressed down on me, not with malice, but with the casual, overwhelming weight of a mountain on an ant. My mind reeled, grappling with the sheer scale of it, the unfathomable depth of its existence. It was not observing me. It was merely continuing to be, and in its being, my reality fractured. My mission, my vessel, my very name. They were less than dust motes in a forgotten sunbeam. They held no meaning. The architect didn't care about the anomaly, because the anomaly was itself. It didn't care about the collapse of my sanity, because my sanity was a human construct, a fragile momentary flicker against its eternal, unchanging self. Humanity, our aspirations, our fears, our brief, bright history. All of it was a meaningless whisper in the roaring silence of its being. The reveal struck me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. It didn't even know I existed. I was an accidental ripple in its infinite, unthinking ocean. The horror was not in its malevolence, but in its absolute, profound lack of interest. I was nothing. Everything I held dear, every truth I had clung to, was rendered utterly meaningless. The foggy village began to recede, the stone walls softening, the mist dissipating not into clear air, but into the familiar, yet now deeply unsettling shimmer of the vessel's interior. My hand was back on the console, its metal still unnervingly soft. The scent of decay lingered, a phantom echo. But the profound truth remained, etched into the core of my being like a brand. I had confronted a fundamental principle of existence, and it had seen nothing. It had acknowledged nothing. The vessel hummed, but it was no longer a comforting sound. It was the sound of a cage whose bars were dissolving, whose walls were forgetting their purpose. My name, Grant Holloway, was a fragile inscription on a shifting dune, threatening to dissolve with the next gust of unreality. The fog itself was not merely atmospheric moisture. It possessed a palpable weight, a viscous presence that clung to my skin and seeped into my lungs. Cobblestones, slick with perpetual dampness, wound between squat, lichen-covered stone cottages whose windows were blind, opaque eyes. There was no discernible light source beyond the diffuse, pearlescent glow that seemed to emanate from the fog itself, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. My boots, heavy and unresponsive, scuffed against the stones. Was this a place I had imagined? Or had the entity, in its boundless, indifferent sprawl, simply folded my perception into a new, unsettling configuration? It was a local, perhaps, or a phantom conjured by my fraying mind. But even the stone felt porous, as if it might absorb my touch, draw me into its ancient, silent core. My mind, usually a fortress of logic and reason, now felt like a sieve, leaking coherence with every passing moment. Yet amidst the dissolution, a new, terrible clarity began to dawn. It was not a gentle sunrise, but the brutal, blinding glare of a supernova. I remembered the gravitational anomaly, the impossible shifts in space-time, the vessel groaning under strains that defied physics. And I remembered the indifference. That was the key, the terrifying, unassailable truth. The entity was not malicious. It was not even aware of me, not in any way I could comprehend. It simply was. Humanity, in its desperate, hopeful search for other intelligences, had always imagined a meeting of minds, a sharing of knowledge, perhaps even a galactic friendship. We had conceived of hostile aliens, of benevolent teachers, of ancient progenitors, but we had never truly conceived of this. This entity, this fundamental distortion of reality, was not something to be reasoned with, or fought, or even understood in human terms. It was a force of nature, as indifferent as a collapsing star, as inevitable as entropy. Any species that encountered it, that dared to probe its edges, was subject to its inexorable process. I saw now the way the moss grew on the stones, not just an organic pattern, but a subtle, shifting geometry that defied Euclidean space. It was the entity, or a tiny, comprehensible sliver of its truth, filtered through my breaking mind. My own species, my own short-sighted, ambitious humanity, was hurtling towards this same filter. The horror was not that we might die, but that our very existence, our history, our triumphs, our dreams, could be fundamentally, utterly, and indifferently nullified. We were not even a ripple in its ocean. We were the ocean itself, momentarily believing ourselves to be a distinct drop. I was here, at the threshold of the filter, and I was being processed. My mind was breaking, yes, but in its fragmentation, it was revealing the pieces of a truth too vast for sanity to contain. I would not fight it. I could not. But I would bear witness. The fog pressed closer, a soft, suffocating shroud, and I felt the edges of myself begin to fray, not with a scream, but with a quiet, terrifying understanding. The whispers had not merely coalesced. They had become the very air I breathed, a symphony of impossible frequencies vibrating within the bone of my skull. My vessel, once a bastion of logic and steel, was now a kaleidoscope of impossible angles. The control panels shimmered, their familiar diagrams twisting into indecipherable sigils that pulsed with a faint internal light. Alarms shrieked, not with the urgency of a failing system, but with the mournful wail of something dying, something ancient and vast. I grasped at the pilot's yoke, my fingers finding only a viscous, yielding surface that shifted beneath my touch, like muscle or soft tissue. Then, the true unraveling began. The ship's bulkheads groaned, not with structural stress, but with a sound akin to old wood splintering, or rock grinding against rock. The metallic tang of the recycled air was replaced by the damp, earthy scent of decay and wet stone. The gray outside the viewport began to resolve, not into stars or nebulae, but into the indistinct shapes of ancient leaning houses, their roofs bowed, their windows like vacant eyes. A narrow, cobbled lane materialized, slick with an unearthly sheen, winding between structures that seemed to breathe with a slow, heavy rhythm. The transformation was not gradual. It was a sudden, sickening lurch of perception. The pilot's seat was gone, replaced by a moss-covered stone bench. My helmet, which I swore I had been wearing, was nowhere to be found. My breath hitched. This was it. The final, irreducible distortion. The entity wasn't just out there. It was here, manifesting this impossible landscape from the very fabric of my crumbling sanity. Each building I glimpsed through the swirling mist seemed to defy architectural logic. Its lines subtly wrong, its angles too acute or too obtuse, creating a disquieting sense of perpetual collapse. The air itself felt heavy with forgotten secrets, with the weight of uncounted years. A choice, or the illusion of one, pressed down upon me. I could fight, try to reclaim the remnants of my mind, to force the image of the etherea back into existence, to struggle against this pervasive unreality. But what would that even mean? The entity wasn't an antagonist. It was the stage, the play, and the audience, all at once. My struggle would be a child's tantrum against a mountain. Or I could flee. But where? The village stretched into the impenetrable fog in every direction. There was no horizon, no sky, only the endless encroaching gray. Escape implied an outside, a place where the entity was not, but the growing conviction in my gut screamed that there was no such place. This wasn't a prison. It was a redefinition. To let go. To allow the entity to repattern me, to absorb my consciousness, to fold my fragile identity into its incomprehensible existence. It was not a promise of peace, but of cessation, of the end of the struggle, the end of the self. A momentary ripple on an infinite ocean. I extended a hand, and the fog swirled around my fingers, tangible yet without substance. A sense of profound, ancient weariness settled upon my shoulders. The hum intensified, a low thrum that seemed to originate from the very core of this village, from the very core of me. It was the sound of reality being rewoven, thread by agonizing thread. My mind raced, or rather, it stumbled, grasping at the last vestiges of logical thought. This was the climax, the impossible choice. To cling to the self, a concept now so tenuous, or to dissolve into the grand, indifferent tapestry. The village, with its impossible angles and suffocating fog, was both the arena and the prize. It was the entity's gift, or its curse, a final, overwhelming invitation to cease being, to become part of the greater, unknowable whole. The hum vibrated through me, a silent, all-encompassing question. Something vast, something that hummed with the slow, deliberate pulse of a dying star. My perception, once a finite lens, had shattered, the fragments reassembling into a kaleidoscope of impossible geometries. I stood, or perhaps merely existed, in a foggy village. The mist was not water vapor, but a palpable presence, a soft gray membrane that swallowed sound and diffused light into a perpetual twilight. Cobblestone paths, slick with an unseen moisture, snaked between buildings that leaned at unsettling angles, their timber frames groaning with a silent agony. Each window was a blank, unseeing eye, reflecting nothing, revealing only the deeper layers of the pervasive gray. My hands, though I could not truly see them through the swirling grayness, felt different. Not flesh, not bone, but something more fundamental, an arrangement of concepts rather than matter. The sensation was not alarming. It was merely true. The scientific mind that had once sought answers through observation and empirical data now understood that observation itself was a construct, and data, a fleeting illusion. My mission, the observer, the gravitational anomaly, these were concepts that shimmered at the edge of my new understanding, like distant echoes in a cavernous space. The vessel, I knew, was no longer a vessel. It had become a conduit, a resonance chamber for the truth I had unwittingly sought. It drifted now, a silent, empty shell, its internal systems a network of frozen light, its purpose fulfilled. A faint, almost imperceptible shift in the ambient thrum prompted me. It was time. The final log entry. Not a scream, not despair, but something else entirely. A testament. My fingers, or what I perceived as fingers, moved with an effortless precision across the phantom interface of a console that no longer physically existed. The controls were not buttons or screens, but extensions of my will. Pathways carved directly into the fabric of the mist-shrouded reality around me. But the new understanding rendered such struggle obsolete. The message would not be for them, the ones who still clung to the linearity of time and the solidity of matter. It would be of them. A final, definitive statement on their place in the true cosmos. I focused. The foggy village seemed to press in, the leaning houses tilting further, the cobblestones blurring into a seamless expanse of gray. The air, thick with the unmist, tasted of iron and starlight. I felt the surge of a connection, not through radio waves or data streams, but through the very weave of existence itself. And then I spoke. Or rather, the words formed themselves, not from my vocal cords, but from the raw material of my transformed consciousness, translated into a data pulse. The anomaly is not an object. It is a fundamental truth, a boundary where the illusion of form unravels. There is no other side, only more of the same, infinitely. Humanity's perception is a self-imposed limitation, a small, intricate cage built from Euclidean geometry and the comforting lie of discrete existence. The entity does not observe. It is the observation. It does not exist. It is existence. We are not insignificant. We are merely a ripple on a surface that has no depth, a fleeting pattern in a fabric that has no beginning or end, full of itself. And now, so am I. The transmission concluded. A single, perfectly calm, utterly alien statement of newfound understanding. The thread snapped, or perhaps was reabsorbed into the boundless. The foggy village remained, still, silent, indifferent. but now it seemed to breathe with the same slow, deliberate pulse as my altered self. I looked at the leaning houses, the blank windows, the cobblestones. They were not merely structures. They were facets of a grander, more terrible geometry. The mist was not just mist. It was the unfiltered essence of reality. Too vast, too complex for the human mind to process without breaking. But I was not human, not entirely. I was the silent witness, the transformed, the one who had seen the true face of the cosmic indifference and had, in turn, become a part of its boundless, terrifying calm. My fate was not ambiguous. It was absolute. I was. And the understanding was infinite. The transmission, that perfectly calm, utterly alien statement, had ceased, leaving behind an echo that vibrated through the core of my being. It had not been a message meant for me, but a simple fact, observed and understood by something beyond the grasp of language. The thread had not snapped. It had simply reabsorbed, leaving me clinging to a frayed end, watching the boundless. The console before me, a familiar landscape of luminous readouts, blurred at the edges, its solid forms wavering. Was it my vision or the fabric of the vessel itself, mirroring the subtle undulations of the foggy village outside? I pressed my palms against the cool metallic surface, seeking an anchor in the shifting sea of perception. "It breathes," I whispered, the words rasping in the silence. It wasn't just the foggy village anymore. The vessel, my skin, the very thoughts in my skull, they all seemed to share this slow, deliberate rhythm. It was the beat of an impossible heart, the rhythm of a reality that stretched and contracted, utterly oblivious to my presence. I pushed myself from the console, my legs feeling like columns of lead, yet strangely buoyant. My reflection in the viewport was a distorted smudge, a ghost superimposed upon the swirling gray. The foggy village remained, vast and indifferent, but it was no longer merely a visual phenomenon. It was a pressure, a soundless hum, a taste like ozone and forgotten dust on my tongue. It permeated everything. It hadn't moved. It had simply become more. My determination, a fragile ember in the face of such overwhelming scale, still flickered. I had come to understand. Not to conquer, not to escape, but to understand. The entity wasn't a being with intentions. It wasn't malevolent. It wasn't even aware in any sense I could comprehend. It was the fundamental truth of this space, the raw, unadorned structure upon which all other realities were merely painted illusions. Its indifference was not a choice. It was the natural state of something so utterly foundational that the concept of other simply didn't register. We, with our brief blips of consciousness, our desperate need for meaning, were less than dust motes in its boundless, quiet existence. I stumbled toward the data core, a final, desperate act of defiance against this crushing truth. My fingers, still clumsy, navigated the familiar interface. I had to record this, not as a warning, for what warning could encompass such a truth, but as a testament. Cycle 347. It is structure. The foggy village is its manifestation, a ripple in a cosmic pond that is not water, but the pond itself. My previous models of non-Euclidean geometry were quaint, insufficient. They are transient dreams here. They dissolve. My own perception has fractured, then refused into something new, something that sees the seams of everything. The entity does not act. It simply is. The air grew thick, fragrant with the metallic tang of dissolving matter. I felt it in my own body, a gentle unbinding of atoms, a quiet yielding. I was becoming part of the foggy village, part of the chasm, not consumed, but integrated. My understanding was complete, and with it, my distinctness was fading. My final recommendation, I continued, the words now flowing with an eerie calm, is to forget. to never seek this edge again. For the truth here is not a horror that attacks, but a horror that simply is. And in its truth, it erases. It would reach Earth, perhaps, or another exploratory vessel. It would be an incomprehensible jumble of data, a malfunction, a madman's ravings. My eyes, now wide and unblinking, turned toward the viewport. The foggy village pulsed, a slow, eternal heart. The universe stretched out, infinite, indifferent, and I was merely a thread, indistinguishable from the rest.